So I'm joined by Roger Christian today, the creator of the lightsaber. Um, First of all, how are you doing, Roger?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
I'm in Canada, so
Nice, nice, nice. I wanted to start with lightsabers because my earliest memory of films and making films is we had like some two toy lightsabers, and me and my friend used to like do battles,
right.
fight each other with lightsabers. I just wanted to ask you, being the creator of the lightsaber, like, how does it feel to see kids around the world play with these hilts that you brought to George Lucas?
I think it's fantastic. It's what when I first read the script and it was a laser sword. I thought, what a great idea, And one of my favorite kind of was King Arthur, and King Arthur's known for Excalibur, and I recognise immediately because when you think of King Arthur, you just think of Excalibur and the power of that sword, and it gives that whole legend its powerful kind of mystic. And I immediately thought, wow, if I can get something that would justify what George wrote in the script, and there was no description. I mean, it was just laser sword, that's all. And George had left everything to me completely to bring to him. There were no instructions, nothing. There was no. We did have 6 paintings by Ralph McQuarrie, and in one of them there's Darth Vader holding a lightsaber, but you can only see the ends of it. It didn't exist, so I had to find everything. And once I'd established what I wanted to do, which was coinciding with George's vision, which was an old universe and used and real, and all my guns were real, I showed him, and stuck together. He left it to me to find, and it's important to know we had no money, so I couldn't make anything. Normally you design it, put it in the workshops, everything would come out the other end. There was no money or time to do anything, so I was reliant on my ideas of finding scrap and junk and creating sets out of junked airplane parts, and I did the same. And the lightsaber evaded me because I couldn't find anything that would justify such an important kind of weapon that I knew, if we could get it right, would become the iconic image of Star Wars.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's the kind of background to that. And then it was pure luck or destiny or whatever. The Force was working on me because I found, when I got the lenses to stick on the front of my binoculars from this camera store in London, that I knew the manager, and he rented out cameras to movies and things. And when I asked him if he had anything I had to make this weapon, and couldn't really describe it. And in these boxes that he pointed me to, when I opened it up, I didn't see a Graflex handle. I just saw a lightsabers. There were 3 of them in the box, and so I would have used them just like that. They're beautiful. There's something that is attractive about objects that, using my imagination anyway, I saw as a lightsaber, but which were functional for something that we didn't understand. Most people didn't know what they were, so you just take it as face value. And sticking those T-strips around to make a handle and the bubble strip on it, I showed George and said, I think I found the lightsaber. And that was it, and if there was no way to make a blade, no way at all. There was no CGI, there was rotoscoping, hand painting each frame, but I had done some art installations and I used front projection paint, and it glowed in the installations when light hit it. So George, against the advice of his director of photography, told me to do it, and we got sticks, and the special effects head drilled out I made another Graflex for him, stuck together so it looked like Luke's, and he drilled it out, stuck a motor in there, and it turned it at the same time. And then we used thin sticks of wood to start with, it kind of worked actually, and it also enabled, because we'd made a decision, all of us, that the blades shouldn't cross through each other, like they should be like samurai swords fighting, or ancient, sabers. And so it gave Alec Guinness and Dave Prowse something to hit against, because they were very thin, they kept breaking, you could see it on YouTube, but it worked. And then George is very little crew, he was just forming then in ILM, he had a rotoscope artist, and he was able to make them like the blade. And I say all that because I did the whole film like that, and when I wrote the book Cinema Alchemist, I did it more as a mentorship, following what George's real intentions behind Star Wars was, creating a fun story, but underneath were very interesting keys that Joseph Campbell had very well versed. He was very well versed in it, George, from Joseph Campbell, who's the great mythologist of the world. He was able to impart all those keys to us growing up, so it's like a mentorship really for the planet, Star Wars, and I always encouraged that, and I understood it, and I understood the power of the lightsaber when I was making it, and why I made 3 different ones, because I made the first one, which is actually Luke's father's, and Obi-Wan was an ancient old desert mystic, so I wanted his to look very different, and we stuck together bits of an old machine gun and a bit of my jet engines we'd broken down, and Darth Vader's had to be engineered and clinical and cold like the Death Star. So what transpired is that they became the icon of Star Wars, really. People tell me it's the most iconic and the most known prop in cinema history, and I'm not surprised, because it's a sword of light. It's an emblem of goodness triumphing over darkness. So and honestly, every kid, every male, every female, every whatever genre you are, doesn't matter, wants a lightsaber because they're just the perfect thing. And now, look at them, I make mine with Theory sabers. They have sound, they have blades that you can do anything with, you can fight with them, they don't break. They're stunningly beautiful. So, we could only dream of that back in the day when I made mine, that they couldn't function. But I think that, to me, because I at the end of my book, the last thing that I say, and the book is, I was kind of asked to write it by David West Reynolds, the head of literature at Star Wars, because I'm the only one who put everything together. There was no group, there was no other people. George, I just read the script, broke down what we needed, and I made them and gave it to George. That was how the process was. So it ended up that I'm the only one who knows how we created that used universe for Star Wars, because John Barry was designing the sets, overloaded and getting everything done. I had to dress it and create that kind of used look that I instinctively knew I would be attracted to if I was the audience.
Yeah.
And I think it was proven, because I just couldn't ever get into science fiction movies before Star Wars. They just never connected to me. They were so over-designed and they looked fake. And even Flash Gordon, there's a reason why they didn't connect, and Star Wars did.
Yeah. Was it James Bond that you started wanting to get into props because of this experience with Pinewood Studios? Was it? Let's go back into how you got started.
Yeah, that was a it's like you can. I go back and look, when I did with the book, I had to look at my journey. How did I end up at this position? And I had I used to go to Saturday morning cinema. There was one near us in Reading, where I grew up, in Caversham. There was one, and I dragged my mother along to watch movies. I had no idea, like I think probably everyone in the audience, that we would just went and watch movies. I never thought about it. I never dreamed that this was actually work that people did. And it was two things that came together. One was Dr. Zhivago, that I saw. My mate and I went, and it was the first time I ever went into a big London cinema. My mate at art school, when I first started, we went and saw Dr. Zhivago, and it made such an impression. I left my body in the cinema. I mean, it marked me somehow, this movie. And I used to earn money because we were all so broke as students, and my father wouldn't support me because I was given, like many people that I have known from England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland, we were all told, you're going to be a doctor, an architect, or a priest. Those were the instructions. And before the kind of 60s came and broke all of that, and basically Bob Dylan came with a song, The Times They Are A-Changing, it gave us permission to change. I was working, putting up marquees all over the south of England, and we earned a fortune as I bought my first Mini. All the money I made as a student in the summer, and there was no life. We worked 7 days a week. And one day I was putting up big marquees, and I saw a prison camp in the forest, and I thought, that's interesting. So I went across, asked these guys building it. I said, what are you doing? They said, yeah, we're making a prison camp. And I said, it's real then? And they said, no, it's not real. Yeah, he said, we have a tramp come by every day and give us sandwiches because he thinks we're prisoners in here. And he said, no, it's for a film for Pinewood Studios, which are just across the forest in the back, and we were in Black Forest. So being me, as soon as I got the opportunity in a break, I went. I couldn't get in, obviously, but I found a hole under the fence and got in under the hole. And that was the first thing I saw when I walked in there. For some reason, the stage doors were open, and there was lights and action and the smell, and it was a James Bond film they were making. And I just stood there amazed and thought, this is a job. People do this. So I wondered, and there was an empty prop room, and there were piles of gold bars. And I picked one up because I thought, is this gold just lying here? There's no one protecting. I realized it was plaster of Paris, and it was all fake. And I went out of there thinking, I got to do this. This is for me, I found something here. So that's how it kind of triggered for me. So yeah, James Bond. But more interesting than that, I wrote so many bloody letters to everybody I could think of, because I was in Reading. My father was in insurance. I knew nobody. There was no connection. Nobody responded. One kind producer responded and said, look, you're obviously done 3 years of art. You should go into the art department, and that would be your easier entry. But he said, you will need to have done architecture because a lot of it's set drawing. Yeah. I was so blindly ambitious. I applied to Oxford School of Architecture. That was the nearest, and got in, but I had to have 2 A-levels, and I had A-level art. In a year by post, before I was accepted, I did A-level economics.
Yeah.
I was so determined, and I got in there, and I got to know the principal really well. And they had got about 8 of us, very, very interesting art students, because they decided that the architecture at that time, this was the 50s, 60s, was so boring that they thought, let's get some different students in and let's have an art teacher in there. And it kind of we were like different. We all had long hair and came, and we were into the Rolling Stones and watching music. Because at Oxford, I would go all the time to see Eric Clapton. John Mayall. All the bands used to play there, and it was like shilling to get in. It was no money. There was no big fame, but I went along with it. And then I got my immediate diploma, and the head of the school, he was such a cool man. I really liked him. And one of the students I was sharing a house with got killed in a car crash. And he came with us. He lived in Wales, and we went to the funeral. So he gave me my diploma and shook my hand, and he said, "Now listen, Roger, I think you should go and do what you really want to do now, because the next 2 years you're going to be so bored, because now we go into structures and concretes and all this stuff." So I learned what I wanted. He's going to be an architect. And I wrote letter after letter. I was trying to find a way in, and I got one response from a man called Charlie Bishop. He was in Borehamwood Studios. I went to see him, took all my work and my folder, and he looked at it and he said, "Listen, I would take you on, but I'm just finishing off this series, Department S, so I've made an appointment for you to meet a designer. Go and see him at Shepperton Studios." I go there, and this is how destiny works. The designer was John Box, who designed Lawrence of Arabia. He designed Dr. Zhivago. And so he looked at all my work. He closed up my folder and he said, "Yeah, I'm taking you on, but if you're prepared to make the tea." And I said, "Of course, I'll do whatever you want." And the English drink tea.
That was your
you know,
role on Oliver, was it?
Yes, that was Oliver. Yeah. So he was only just starting out, but I became the tea boy because it was a massive art department. Oliver was a huge endeavor. But John, he kind of gave me the key for my journey through the film industry, because he said, closed my folder, all my work. He said, "This is all great." He said, "But listen to me. You're in the desert. You've got a bottle of green ink in your pocket and an airplane next to you, and the director and producer arrive and they're going, 'This is fantastic, works. Can you have the plane red by tomorrow morning?'" And he said, "You either do it or you talk your way out of it with an alternative." That's the film industry.
Yeah, I was going to ask kind of like, you've went into directing as well, and we'll go on to that a bit later, but what's the attitude to you at the time from directors, and kind of like, how was it working under like quite a stressful environment for these directors like George Lucas? There was quite a lot of pushback on him, wasn't there, by the British crew? And like, what was it kind of, how was the approach to you, and kind of like, is there any advice for like young directors where this is how you should speak to your crew, this is how you should speak to your art department, because that's what gets the best out of you?
Well, I think, I was trained by John Box, and like in those days, it was all suits and ties, and I would go every weekend to the art cinemas in London. I watched every European master, everything. My favourite, Kurosawa, and Sergio Leone, all of George's favourites, as it turned out. And we were inspired by them. And so I was constantly told to get a haircut, to buckle under. You'll never make a career like this. You go on the drawing board, and by the time everything's taken out of you, you'll become a designer. So I would have none of that. I mean, I'd escape and go and look at the sets, because I learnt everything I ever learnt from John Box. That if you'd watch Oliver, the canals, just stunning, everything he designed in that film, I would be sent back to the office. You're going to be fired. And I followed a career. I went into television because I was offered. They were closing down the old rediffusion, and it was becoming ITV. and it's one of the places I'd applied to at the end of Oliver, and I got accepted and said it will be a 6-month contract with a designer. I was literally told by everybody in the art department, except for John Box, I have to say, but everyone else said, your career's over. You go and work in television. We don't deal with television. These are the attitudes that are part of what I'm going to answer your question, but they're all part of it. I went there. The designer was doing a period TV series, and we were on location to start with in Item Moot, and I'm down there with him. I had about a week and a half with him, and then he said, listen, I got to go back because we have to do all the sets. Can you take over? And I was immediately with the director making sure this filming was good. And so I learned from an early age, and I say this to everybody, anybody working in this industry, it doesn't matter. Trust your instinct. Your instinct will never let you down. And I did, and I thrived, and I loved it, and I worked with the director, and whatever they wanted, I got done, and I was offering stuff. And I think that carried through. I worked with a young designer from the BBC who was also very unusual because the BBC trained them young, Philip Harrison, and he and I did some really experimental movies. Final Conflict, a Moorcock film. We did interesting stuff. So I was outside of the normal box. My thinking was always that way. I did a movie called Aikenfield, whereby it was a first cooperative in Suffolk. We got paid the minimum you could be paid, but we were part shares in the movie. It was for television, and I was recreating after the war, recreating how it was. And in the war, we were doing it all in Suffolk with no money, So I can't, all of these attitudes. I worked with Ken Russell on Maid, on Marla, and Ken Russell's famous for being brutal on set, and so I kind of joined Marla. The set decorator asked me to design it with him, but he was really set decorating, and he'd always worked with Ken Russell, and he was his kind of whipping boy. And I said, doesn't it upset you? He's so like this. He said, no, he doesn't really mean it. He always employs me, but I wouldn't have it. And I solved. No designer had ever been able to put. He loved polished floors that were mirrored. He always had them in his movies. I worked out how to do it, and I solved it. And I did stuff, didn't say anything. And I think all of that kind of gave me, and I was still young when we did Star Wars, and having met George, who was a kindred spirit, we were like students, honestly. And because there was, Fox would not commit to the movie with the budget, it meant that John Barry, myself, and Les Dilly, the other art director, spent 4 months with George in a tiny studio in London working out how in the hell to make this movie with no money. So we became friends, and George and I shared exactly the same vision, and George was famous at that time. He never spoke, didn't say anything, he just worked and got things done. I understood. I didn't need somebody explaining to me, look, I want a lightsaber, can you make it like this and do that? He never said anything, and George since then has, and it's part of his talent, that he's always said since then that what he did was employ people who had enough knowledge to do the job, but would never turn around and say, no, Gov, that's not how we do things, this is how we do it. He said he wrote what was impossible to be done, like a lightsaber, and the people he hired would figure out how to do it. I was figuring out how to do everything because John Barry didn't. John Barry's preference was Barbarella. He just left everything to me. So I think partly that George had a terrible time on that shoot, and the crew, led by Gil Taylor, who the director of photography, who was the instigator of the war against George. I have no reason to hide it anymore. It's become known now. And I witnessed it on the first day of the shoot. And we all thought, great, this man did, the DP did the Beatles film, he did Polanski's early movies, he did Dr. Strangelove. George, being an independent filmmaker, and he, after all, he might have been quiet. He was the opposite of what the British thought an American film director, loud with a megaphone, all of this. George was like a student dressed in one pair of jeans, a Prud short and tennis shoes, and that was it, and never said anything. And on the very first day of shooting at the Death Star, the Sandcrawler.
And you designed all that, didn't you? Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Created the look of it.
Yeah. John Barry designed the actual set for the Sandcrawler, and then I had to make it look old and used and real, and put all that stuff in it. And I designed all the robots and everything that went in front of it, and I had to get all that ready. And in fact, on about the second or third shot, George had a viewfinder and was lining up a shot. And Gil Taylor strode over to him and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm looking and lining up the shot." He said, "I do that. You do the actors. I look after all of that." And that became war, because George didn't do that. He was an independent filmmaker. And after all, he directed American Graffiti, that was the highest profitable movie in relation to its budget. And so Gary Kurtz was the intermediary from then on. And unfortunately, a lot of the crew relied on people like Gil to get their work, so they all, and even Les, bless him, always said, I read the script, I have no idea what it was about. None of the crew understood the script. They knew it was a children's fairy story, science fiction. Science fiction was dead at the box office. No one read science fiction in Britain except for me and a few people who used to go to Forbidden Planet and get our graphic novels and everything. And I read Dune, I read Arthur C. Clarke. I was an avid reader of it. So the attitudes in Britain at that time, and American culture was just in the toilet. I mean, there was no recognition of anything in America except westerns and hamburgers. Otherwise, they were very supercilious, the British at that time. They were felt they were the center of the universe and they were the best. This was a pervading attitude from everybody. That attitude just collided with this film coming along at that time that nobody had any belief or faith that it would ever work. They just thought, this is not going to. And seeing me getting old guns and sticking bits on them, they thought they wanted to get me fired. They thought it was absolute crap that I was doing. And
you won an Academy Award for it?
Yeah. And funny enough, we all did except for Gil Taylor. So karma kind of played its role then. But I think, George to this day said only 5 people stuck by his side and got that film made, and it was me and John Barry and the 2 art department who were not the creatives. They got it made. So I think, and again, I at the end of the book, my Cinema Alchemist book, the last line is, "Don't let anyone tell you you can't, you can." And it's like to inspire people. So, it's basically about your earlier question about lightsabers. I have absolute joy now that, unlike any other movie, fans go out, seek out what I used for all these props, find them and making them themselves. So they're all discovering talents they probably never knew they had. And this is, to me, is worth so much, and every time I see a lightsaber, I think it's great, you know.
Yeah.
And it's great that this is, and I had an inkling it would happen, knowing George and knowing the myth and mythology and how it worked. I had an inkling that I knew this would work. I didn't know that it would go to be a global success story, but you know, I just think George gave the world something to believe in, and that's very important.
Yeah, I mean, you went on to do Alien as well. What were the key differences between Ridley Scott and George Lucas? Like, Ridley was inspired by Lucas, wasn't he? Star Wars, if I'm not mistaken. So, what was it? The same relationship or different?
No, it's exactly the same. They were both, you know, George never played politics. He just got his head down and worked. They were insulting him in front of me, in front of the crew. He just never said a word. He just got on, and Ridley was the same. And they both were determined to make what they wanted to make, that they knew would work based on that script and based on very different visions. That George wanted a film for 12-year-olds, a fantasy, but look real, and Ridley wanted a space truck for adults because it was an R-rated film. And again, a destiny struck, because I was designing Life of Brian, and the producer read the script and cancelled it on the spot, said it was blasphemous. And that day, I got a call from Ridley saying, "Are you free? Get down to Shepperton right now, I need you." And nobody knew how to do what I was doing, which was buying airplane scrap and junk and making stuff like that. So he said, "Can you make me a space truck?" And the designer, Michael Seymour, had done all of Ridley's commercials, so he was familiar to Ridley, but he had no kind of inkling for science fiction. He didn't understand it. So Ron Cobb, who's just brilliant, along with Giger, Ron Cobb drew up the vision. He was there all the time, and I think, you know, that Ridley said to me right at the beginning, because Michael Seymour had already constructed the wooden skeleton of the Nostromo throughout 2 stages in Shepperton. They took the doors down and it went, because Ridley wanted that claustrophobia. You went in the set and you were in it.
Yeah.
And the designer had hired this young kid. It was just convinced him that he could do what I did. And when they asked me to come as the art director, I went and looked, and he had 1 jet engine and a few bits of scrap. So I immediately got my crew I trained on Star Wars, because it's a different skill. You don't just stick stuff on a wall. You have to do it engineered wise, so it looks real and everything, and you have to layer it and layer it. It takes tons of it. So I ordered truckloads of stuff, and Ridley actually had me. He wanted to screen test Sigourney Weaver, and obviously the studio wanted a star in that, and he wanted her. So instead of a usual white wall, just her talking, he asked if I could build him a bit of corridor, and he put her in action, because that he knew would convince them. So that's what I did. I built the first piece of Nostromo ever as a test screening set, and that set the whole vision of the Nostromo. So they just said, just get it done. And Ridley just got his head down. It was just as difficult in that there were, I don't know, 6 or 8 producers on set, always asking why he took so long. And I would argue with the producers. I'd never worked with a director who was so fast. He was shooting 20, 30 setups a day. And because he had the ship and he built in the lighting very cleverly, it wasn't like each one you had to go and reset up everything. He was able to shoot with a camera, most of it handheld on his shoulder, these heavy Panavision cameras. He shot most of it, giving it that, and it's interesting you ask that, because he made it like a documentary. George always told me, I'm not making a science fiction film, I'm making a documentary. And that, I think, was very similar to the, both directors. And both directors became friends with me because I was just doing what they wanted without being told, without being asked, and having an understanding of what was required.
You went on to do Black Angel as well. That was commissioned by George. Was that because of that friendship that you had? And how did you approach directing, having worked with those two previous directors and obviously Monty Python as well? Because you wanted to change after getting those 3 big roles on the set.
Yeah.
You wanted to go into directing, didn't you? You saw this as an opportunity to direct.
I knew with those 3, and I was being offered films to design everything and some amazing stuff, and I knew, okay, I got to break it. I actually applied for film school, the British Film School, and got in. And I went there so that any offer that was coming, I was able to turn down. I said, no, because I was, the advantage there, even though I was a kind of veteran going in with students who, and at those times, again, most of those students, you had no reason to be there. I think they'd just chosen something but had no instinct for filming. But there was a group who we were friends who were, and I was doing editing courses, lighting, editing, acting, all sorts of stuff. It didn't last long, and I wrote, and I decided, okay, so I've got to do a short film. Talking doesn't work. I've got to make something. And that's what every film student has to do. You can talk your hind leg off a donkey, but it won't get you a job. And so I wrote, and then I thought, what am I going to do? I'll write what I'm passionate about, which was Arthurian legend, Merlin. It was always my dream to make maybe Merlin or something like that. So I took and I loved Kurosawa, and Kurosawa filmed in Mount Fuji, using it as a landscape as part of the drama of his movies. And so I'd been to Scotland, and I realized no one had ever filmed Scotland, this mystical beauty. It would never been on film like that before. So I thought, right, there's my location. And so I wrote a piece that was a kind of 25-minute epic with no money. So I wrote the script, and then there was not enough money to make it at the film school budget.
So I just wanted to ask, do you write not even thinking I need to be practical with the budget? Do you just kind of just write what's your imagination can take you? You don't really think about the money?
No, I think you have to not limit yourself, and I do it all the time when I'm doing things now, and I limit myself and think probably that's not the right thing. But I do have the benefit of all of the movies I'd made. In the art department, you're very much in the forefront of budgeting, directors' visions, everything. So I knew what I could do or not. I wasn't going to write flying spaceships and stuff. I knew I couldn't do that. And I thought, no, I'll only have a small amount of money. What could I achieve in Scotland? So I wrote very little dialogue, so I wasn't hampered by having to do all of that. I didn't have enough money to do it, and by sheer luck again, because this keeps happening to me, Ridley was doing the sound mix for Alien. Bill Rowe in EMI, the studios in Boreham Wood, was the #1 in the world at that time. He was an amazing, very simple, humble man who I was friends with. And so I called Ridley and said, can I come and sit and absorb and learn? And so he said, yeah, come in. So I was there every day, and we'd have lunch every day with him and watching. And Sandy Lieberson, who was the head of Fox in the UK, came in to see, just to visit, to see his film coming, because they're investing in it, and he was having to report to Hollywood, this is going to work, when again they doubted that it would. Yeah. And then he saw me and sat down next to me and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I was at film school, and I've written this short film and I don't have enough money to make it. And he said, what is it? And I told him, and he said, well, listen, can you send it to me? So I sent by telex, whatever we had in those days, I sent it to him. And he called me the next morning and said, listen, George was really upset with us over the short film he put, because in those days there was only a short film and the feature. Short film was about 25-30 minutes long. That was it. There were no adverts, there were no trailers, nothing. So they put a film, something about policemen going on holiday. It was terrible. And George said it was alienating his audience. And the British government at the time had a thing called the Edie Fund, and they gave £25,000 to a director to make his feature debut, like a short film, if a film producer that was having a film released in the UK would say, I will tie it to my film. So he said, listen, we've chosen about 5, because George said, there is that funding there, find me a script and get it made. And he said, we've chosen about 5, but we're not really sure about any of them. He said, would you mind if I sent this to George? So it was sure nothing to do with me or working with him, anything. So he sent it to George, and he called me 2 days later and said, George called and said, let Roger make this. It's exactly the tone of what Star Wars is. And then he said, and just let him make it. I don't want anyone interfering with it. Just let him go and make the film he wants and finish it. I will be the first one to see it. Yeah. So I got £25,000, which would enable me. I had a crew of 9. I got cameras that they gave me on special deals because I knew all the people by then, and my entire salary that I should have had went on horses, because I needed 2 trained horses to be taken from London up to Scotland. And I shot it in 10 days in Scotland using like amazing kind of landscapes. And the DP, Roger Pratt, because I knew Terry Gilliam so well, he looked after the cameras. He wasn't a cameraman, nothing. He just looked after the cameras for him. And he'd make one little piece of film on how a washing machine worked. But I just knew, again, it's instinct, I knew something was right. And he and I, the Electric Cinema in Portobello Road had a retrospective of Kurosawa, and there were 3 every day. Roger and I sat with our girlfriends every day watching Kurosawa, absorbing it. And here's how this works, and instinct works. First day, and I had enough money, I got 3 rolls of film. Gary Kurtz gave me all the leftover short ends from Empire Strikes Back, which were bits of film, which were all different types of negative, but I kind of measured out. I thought I could do 1 shot here and move on. I couldn't even do 2 takes. But the first day of shooting in a forest, and it was raining, and I was just getting the costume of Tony Vogel kind of put together, and I saw Roger puzzling around the camera and looking really worried, and I said, what's up? And he said, listen, the meter, my exposure meter that they all rely on, he said, it's telling me I can't shoot. There's not enough light. He said, but look through that camera. And I looked through, and I looked at him, and he said, it's stunning. And I said, let's do it. So he threw the meter over his shoulder. That's it. Worked on instinct from then on in, and and my first screening was terrifying. I mean, it was in Pinewood Studios. There was George Lucas, Irwin Kershner, Robert Watts, Gary Kurtz, Terry Gilliam had got in there somehow. And I'm looking and thinking, I made this thing with short ends, with no money, and Jesus, and hardly any dialogue, everything. I got under the desk. I thought, this is the end. I got to go back to designing. I can't do this. Roger Pratt was throwing up, literally in the toilet. He was so embarrassed. And Irwin Kershner pulled me out from under the desk, and he said, Roger, it gets worse. He gave me that advice, and that was it. And then George loved it, and that was it. And that story, I think, it just carried through, you know, everything I'd seen, the way that George had done things, Ridley had done things, other directors had done things, the way of committing yourself to try to get a vision to work, and like just never giving up. I mean, George, on those first days, honestly, in the desert, I mean, the first morning is the first time that C-3PO ever had a full suit on. There was no time before that, and the legs shattered. George showed me later, when he was digitizing all the films for the digital release of the 6 movies, he showed me, I was up at the ranch, everything, there was gold tape everywhere. It didn't show on film. As soon as he went to digital, Darth Vader had black gaffer tape all over the place. I mean, the thing was held together, but it didn't show.
Yeah.
And George, I mean, the R2-D2 crashed on the first shot. We made a secret lightweight fishing wire to pull it with fishing line, with a lightweight one that we kept secret, and because we knew the radio control wouldn't work. And from then on in, all the 3-legged versions we pulled with fishing wire on Star Wars on the first one. George, there were floods, the crew were not friendly, but he just didn't give up. He just quietly, solidly dug his heels in and got whatever he could out of each shot. And I think that's, you know, this was the greatest film school for me that I could ever go through. And I saw the same with John Box getting everything done, and Oliver being made on a huge scale. But there's never enough money. There's never enough time.
Yeah.
And I had absorbed all of that. I was lucky. So when I made my first film, I knew what I could do within that time. I was able to storyboard it, and I knew I could only take one take. I didn't get bogged down thinking, oh, is that right or not? Yeah, it looked good. Move on.
Yeah.
I knew. And I also, my inspiration for Black Angel was Frank Franzetta's painting The Death Dealer. I loved his art, science fiction art, and there was a rainbow in the shots. And I told the editor this, Roger. I said it would be fantastic to have a rainbow, and he said, "Well, Roger, that's special effects. We can't afford that." So the day I first shot the Black Angel in a forest, it was raining in a forest. The sun was breaking through the trees, and we had one smoke machine. I was able to put smoke in everywhere, and that, you know, Ridley Scott, smoke is everything. I learned again how to use it, and we had a telephone box in the middle of a field that Roger and I would go with our pennies, stick it in the slot, and call Alan Strawn, the editor, who was in London. And then he said, "No, it looks fantastic. I can't tell you." He said, "How did you do the rainbow?" We thought he was taking the mickey. And I said, "Yeah, ha ha, thanks." He said, "No, I mean it. There's a rainbow right round the Black Angel." And we thought, until we got back to London, Roger and I went to meet him in the studios where we were editing, and there was a rainbow around the night. Accidents happen, you know, and there are things that, and I worked it out. I looked and I examined the film, and there was a drop of water from the rain on the end of the Black Angel's staff, and it had refracted. The sunlight hit it, and it had caused a rainbow in the lens. So, you know, you have to be open to gifts that we're given as filmmakers.
Yeah, for our sort of like aspiring filmmakers, I guess the message is kind of like, just put yourself in there, and then obviously those things can happen. And you speak about like the nerves that you had, probably the stress as well, but you know, it all came about in the end. And speak about the Return of the Jedi as well, because you did a second unit directing on that. How did that come about?
Well, I from doing the Black Angel, then I realized, because I got put down by the entire film industry. David Putnam looked at it and turned to me when he came out and said, "You should go back to art directing." And again, you have to be. Ridley always says you've got to have nerves of steel and you've got to be tough in this business, because most people then would have shrunk away and gone back and believed it, and I didn't believe it. I just thought, no, you didn't get it. And so I thought, screw this. And I was still at film school, and I thought, I'm going to do an acting piece. That's what I'm going to do. And Paramount, the head of Paramount, Ian Scorer at the time in London, had called me into his office and said, the Edie Fund is finished. There's one left and we've got it. We all love Black Angel. Would you direct the last one and make something for us? And you have a bit more money. We'll put up a little bit more for it. And I found this young producer, Lloyd Phillips, at film school, and he and I got together because I said, why don't you produce it? And we came together with our choices. I had 3 Hemingway stories I thought I could adapt. I walked into his house and he said, here's a cup of coffee. I don't want to hear what you've got. I'm not going to tell you what I've got. Read this. And I read this little story called Dollar Bottom, about this kid in Scotland who wanted to be chairman of Lloyd's. And I said, this is amazing. We have to do this. He said, that's what I thought. Okay, I'm going to send you to London, because it was written by James I have to look it up, sorry, but it's important. But James Kennaway, sorry. He wrote Tunes of Glory. He was one of the finest writers of Scotland. This little film was a story he wrote for Lilliput magazine. He got 9pence for it, and it turned him into a professional writer. It was the first short story, and in fact it's a revenge story on his school, Glenn Almond, who he hated the school and they hated him. He died in a crash. He was a great drunkard, and he died drinking after a long drinking with he was with 2 of the big actors who were the famous drinkers, and he died. His jag hit a tree. So the widow had it, and she had a commercials company, and she was determined it would be a little film, and she'd had offers. This story's beautiful, for television. He said, you got to go and convince her, you can do it. So I was sent to London. I had to convince her, and I told her, listen, the dialogue is amazing. I'm just using everything, and I think we have to cut down a little bit of it to make it work. And I said, this will be for Paramount. It's going in the cinemas with ordinary people. And she said, I'm giving you the rights. So again, I had to convince, I had to be, and she recognized my authenticity and genuine enthusiasm, everything. This wasn't bullshitting. I really wanted this story. That film we made in Scotland with, again, tiny crew and actors who'd never acted before, kids, they were all 9 and 10. It won the Academy Award for Best Dramatic Short Film that year. Yeah. And so I was off, and I got offered The Sender as a first feature, and I was waiting for, it went from Fox, decided they weren't going to do it, and it went to Paramount. I was waiting for the money, and I got a call from George saying, what are you doing? And I said, I'm waiting for the money. So he said, well, can you come up here and take over? And George decided he would do the second unit, because the experience was so bad on that first film that he had Erwin Kershner direct the second one.
Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, Empire Strikes Back, and Richard Marquand directing Return of the Jedi. And George was doing the second unit himself. He realized that, because Empire Strikes Back is actually an adult film. That's why all the adults, it's their favorite, but it's not George's, because he's for 12-year-olds. That's what he makes his films for. So he decided he would spend more time with Richard Marquand on the first unit. And so because of Black Angel and because of Dollar Bottom, he knew he could trust me to go and take over. So I went and took over second unit on Return of the Jedi. I was there for 6 or 7 weeks. And it was, you know, I walked in, there's a massive scene towards the end of the film where a part of one of the spaceships that gets hit, and they have a part of the engine comes smashing through the windows and into the floor. I took over when I walked in. There were 6 cameras set up and 2 levels and stuntmen. It was a huge sequence, you know. I just walked in and took it over. I'd absorbed what I had from everybody else, from Ridley, from George, from other directors I'd worked with, and so I just took it over and got stuck in, you know, and I did some amazing stuff on it. I was really happy.
Yeah, I've heard the Ewoks was that part of you?
No, George loves the Ewoks, and I understand why kids love them. So, of course, all of the party scenes at the end, he gave that to me and said, "You just film the Ewoks." He said, "I want you to do the party and do all of this." I had Jim Henson with puppets in little nest dancing. Warwick Davis, it was his first movie. He was about 10 or 11. I was bossing him around, telling him to do somersaults and dance, and I went on and on. I kept doing it, and I kept saying, "Can we now do something else, George?" And he was going, "No, I know what you're doing." I did 10 days of Ewoks, and I did a lot of other cool stuff. I actually shot Harrison. They couldn't schedule him in when he falls out of the carbon freeze. I got to shoot that with Harrison because I knew them. You know, we'd also become friends on the first film. And
was it more enjoyable then than the first one?
Yeah.
So
yes, because George had, you know, he had the biggest hit in the world with the first Star Wars, and so everybody then thought, wow, he knows what he's doing, you know, and he's a hit maker. So by that third one, and you know, Richard Marquand's a very accomplished director. He was very good, and so they were then the third in a series of very huge money-making franchise that had started, and George didn't have to fight anybody. He didn't have to say anything or do anything. He just wrote it and had storyboards now, and that, you know, in each film it was arriving, the CGI was going, everything was appearing now that he'd envisioned doing the first one, but everything was there now. There were kits to do whatever he wanted, and so it was a much different experience. Yeah, but still the same. He had the film set up like independent filmmaking. Even on Phantom Menace, when I directed the whole second unit, they asked me to do half of the film, basically, because that film was a 20-week budget shoot, and George would only had 12 weeks to shoot it, which was impossible. So I did half the movie, and we had 2 crews side by side. But it was only George and Gary, and by then it was Rick McCallum, and he was really the only one on set. There was no outside interference. Why are you doing that? Why don't you? Will this work? You know, none of that. George was able to just get on, and people did it. They were revered by then of what they were working on. So, you know, again, it goes back to instinct. You've got to be true to your instincts.
Yeah. And George Lucas is obviously known for, like, where you say, like, we owe, like, modern cinema to him, in a way, and, like, with those prequel films, what was the key differences with those ones, with, like, the CGI and stuff? Was that a completely different experience?
Yeah, I mean, even on Phantom Menace, I remember once I was on one stage, the big stages at EMI. He was on one, George. I was on the other one. the entire stage was blue screen everywhere you could look, but there was a piece missing. And I called Rick McCallum and I said, Rick, we need some more. He came over and he said, for God's sake, between you and George, you've got all the blue screen in Britain. What do you need? And I said, look, through the camera, that we have to have that bit missing. And he got it for me. That was the difference, you know, that he could do stuff by then and not have to worry. Even never did many takes, but if he liked one take with the young Anakin, he didn't have to try and get it right. He knew he could take his head from one and put it on the other take. He could do all of that stuff, so the pressure eased off. And I think, but George, and I say this, and this is for every student ever, George never wrote special effects. George wrote a story, and every film George ever wrote couldn't be made. Even Star Wars could not be made. R2-D2, there was no way to make it work. We figured out how to make one work, simply. And every single story he's written, the story couldn't be made. And he got people who figured it out, you know. So people, you know, it's an easy thing. Oh, I'm going to write this. Oh, I'll do CGI there and do this and that. That's not how you think about it. You think about a story. Because every successful film on the planet is story, as it is with books, literature, everything, art, you know, it's story. And so now the toy box is open. And in just reference, I went with my eldest son, we went to see, on Sunday night, I went to see Holy Mary. And sitting in the cinema, right when they have now the sound, they have an animation for the sound for, and I turned to my son and I said, you know, the cinema experience now that we have, we owe entirely to George. The editing, the CGI, he pushed that, the sound technology he pushed to get the experience better for the audience of what he saw in his mind that we should be having. So we owed not just the movies to George, but the experience of cinema as well. It all came from him, without ever seeking praise, without ever seeking, oh, look what I did, nothing. And I tried to follow the same kind of path as him all this time, really.
Yeah, you've got some Clone Wars helmets in the background.
Yeah, that's my. I got a 12-year-old, and that's his. He's like, he grew up without knowing what I did. He just knew there was some things around and stuff like that, posters, and then it actually came through school. Like everyone was on Star Wars and everything, and then it slowly dawned on him that what I had been part of all of this, and then I took him to his first Star Wars event, and he thought he'd landed in paradise. I mean, there was also, he was into Pokemon. There were stalls, there were lightsabers. He would go around, meet these lightsaber makers, and they said, "Your dad, can you get him to come and sign an autograph? He got a lightsaber through persuading me." And he was meeting he met Hacksmith, who made the first real lightsaber, which was a massive affair with tanks and everything, and he was there. He's got 20 million followers. He was then 10. He said, "Dad, you've got to meet this YouTuber," because he knows them from YouTube.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, those are his. So he helps me, and anything I get for autographs, he takes the money and he goes off and he bargains. And I'm teaching him how to bargain, and he's buying all these helmets.
Nice. I bet you got loads of stuff like the original lightsabers as well. You have that stuff.
I've got the original Graflex handles, and then the ones that I put together. Yeah, there's a few things. Yeah.
Because the Clone Wars is like the era that I grew up as a kid. So you said like about George Lucas wanted to make the films for kids. You've got like a kid of your own. Like, how important is it for kids to see these films, in your opinion?
It's very, very important, because and I'm nothing against religion, but they're not connecting anymore to the world, and we need it. We need myths. We need stories. People aren't reading so much now. I mean, the whole thing had changed, and in my opinion, George gave the world a myth, a legend, for the cinema age, which is the big audience. We're not now stuck with campfires and having to listen to stories, and things like that. So the values that we absorb growing up, George instilled. Luke Skywalker is a fantastic story. It's the hero's story. It's the story of everybody on this planet. Doesn't matter your genre or anything. It's the kid from a farm with being brought up by uncles and aunts with a yearning, and then finding a mentor, and then becoming the hero. So he's fulfilling his own destiny, not somebody else's, his. Everybody, it doesn't matter if you're going to be an accountant, if you just approach it like it's a terrible job and you're unhappy all your life, you're never going to be happy. But if you approach it with a kind of passion of love of what you're doing, that's very much needed now, because the world is YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and all of this. It's instant gratification. They're looking, and I think it's subconscious. These things which George buried in Star Wars, which are in all the myths and legends, there are subconscious elements. Buddhism is a prime example of it, and George is a Buddhist. There's subconscious that the Buddhism tells stories, and through telling those stories you're absorbing a way to get through life from being a child into teenager, into manhood, and up to the end. These are very important, that we need, the planet needs, and I think that's why. I mean, I meet hundreds, if not 1,000 people now going to these events and stuff, because I've realized I have to now, because I'm the only one who can tell the stories, and George can't do it. I have to be the one to do it. I don't think anyone ever that I have met and talked to said, Star Wars changed my life. It's very, very important. It's why I take it so seriously, and why I'm heavily pushing people to understand what this is, because I think it's we all grew up. The environment that you're in is how you're going to evolve. It's your parents, your environment. We're lucky we're not in war times, but we're not maybe in a starving village in Africa, but everything affects you the way that you're growing up. It's always by external keys somehow that you find the way to find yourself. And that's my key ingredient to any storyteller, whether it's literature, painting, writing, whatever, is find yourself and find your own vision. And this again comes down to instinct. And to get there, you have to meditate, you have to go inside, you have to get rid of the external elements that are all negative, including the mind. Every time you sit down with, oh yeah, I'll just sit here. Oh, why didn't I do that? Why should that happen? Why did he say that to me? Yeah. The mind is full of all of this negative stuff. You have to learn how to get rid of that. And I think Star Wars penetrated, you go to a village in China, there's a Star Wars doll. It's penetrated the world. And as I said, I think it's given something to believe in, and it's not an accident. It's just he was somehow put on this planet to give hope, and that's what it's about, and the philosophy of George is contained in that scene in Return of the Jedi, when he doesn't kill Darth Vader, which is what he should have done story-wise, or Darth Vader didn't kill him, and he puts the lightsaber down, and it's the end, it's compassion and forgiveness. That's what George is all about, and that's what these are about. That brings balance to the Force, and that's really the end of George's 6, even though he made them in the different order, but that's the end of Star Wars. He would have gone on much further if he'd continued with the last 3.
Yeah, I wanted to move on to the more modern stuff, because in the Clone Wars, there was a 2003 Clone Wars and there was a 2008. I don't know how familiar you are with the 2 series, but the 2008 version, it has like quotes before the episode that can kind of like, it's just a good messaging. And one of them is never give up hope, no matter how dark things seem. And then the episode will play and it will kind of relate to the quote. Yes. I just enjoy it as like, yeah, like as you were saying, like Lucas being a Buddhist and having these messages put in. I just enjoyed them.
Yes,
having this like positive messaging.
Because you don't get many in this modern world, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, and it, especially growing up now and young growing through, you know, and it's now, wow, these YouTubers, I can make millions of dollars when I'm still young, and I can be Messi, I'm going to be a famous footballer, and there's not any recognition of what it takes to get there, because it's all so instant. But you know, when you look at everybody and what they go through and what George went through, I mean, it's a miracle that Star Wars is with us. Everything was against it, and before that, you know, and you know, after THX, he was finished, and even graffiti. The learning curve and sticking to his guns and believing in himself is how the story works, and that's how the story of Luke works. So I think, you know, these are, and it's hope. That's why Star Wars works, and I think that's why this Hail Mary works, because I don't understand watching this movie how an American audience that loves bangs, whizzes and CGI and men flying about and whatever the hits are, this film makes you think, but it's full of hope. And I think these are so needed in this modern world. So, you know, and in the end, that's what religions were there to give. When you look at the real words of Christ, the real words of Muhammad, the real words of Buddha and Krishna, they're all the same messaging, and it's all hope.
Yeah.
So it's important.
So, would you say like Star Wars was an independent film, and you yourself being a director as well, you want to stay true to that independent stuff, don't you? And what advice would you say to other independent filmmakers that want to also make films with good messages?
Yeah, I've always stuck to it, you know, and I've been #1 in Hollywood. I made a huge Hollywood movie, even though that was independent. I've always stuck to being independent, and I will do, you know. Black Angel, it's been like 10, 12 years that I've been trying to make the feature of it, but I'm not giving in on the vision that I want. If I go to Hollywood, they just want to change everything, and I become a mouse in a mouse wheel. And so I'm sticking to my guns, and I'll get it made, and I'll get it made as I want. And you know, when I say I can make this big epic film for a quarter of the budget, they don't believe you in Hollywood. No, it's going to be a pile of crap. Yeah. When I was talking with Rick McCullum one day when we were doing Phantom Menace, because I said, really nothing's changed. The attitude, there were families on set and everything, and it was just a quiet George who's making his movie. And he said, Roger, when we started, it was $110 million, which was, George could finance that himself. And he said, I put it to all the studios and said, we may have to come to Hollywood this time. Can you send me budgets? He said, every single one was $400 million. That's why I value the independent, you know, and the film, probably I'm better known for, which is my favorite, is Nostradamus.
Yeah.
No one understands how I made that movie for $4 million, and it was valued at $20 million, which was the budget when I started with Working Title. That was the budget they gave me. And we made a bigger film. It wasn't smaller by taking a massive risk and going to Romania right after the revolution, but it was medieval France, the look of it, and going there, I made it for $4 million, including all the actors, everything. So I've kind of stuck to that, yes, and I think that's, when you start, it's like me doing Black Angel. The first thing you do is probably one of the most important things you'll ever do as a young filmmaker, because that's you. You're putting all your passion and everything into it, and don't just try and look, oh, well, I'm going to make something that I've seen in Hollywood, or I'll try and do this, or I'll make something that'll get me known in Hollywood. You don't approach it that way. You find a story, and you make that story. You'll never get another chance again. Like that. So you try to put everything into it, and it doesn't matter how long it is. You now can make them in an easier way than I did. You can even film now on an iPhone. It's good enough to make movies with. So it's more and more important. It's the story that matters.
Yeah, exactly. I have many questions for you. But one of the questions I have with your films is, like, do you have any say in who's casted in the films? Like, you had John Travolta in one of your films, didn't you?
He cast me.
Yeah.
he cast me. He only told me the story afterwards, that he talked at great length to Quentin Tarantino about making it. And he used to put directors up to Quentin first for his advice. And he told me this the first time I met John Travolta, and he said Quentin turned everybody down until your name came up. And then he said, he's your director, John, because he loved The Sender. I never met him, because John thought I'd met him, and I said, no, he put us together. John put
just
me and
such a
Quentin
massive
together.
fan of films, isn't he, Quentin? Just
Huge.
a massive, yeah.
So he took, when he saw The Sender, the studio had completely gone down on me on it. They got it in some small cinema. He took people every night to see that film. And he told me then he was working in the video store. He recorded it off television. When they put in the video store the rental version, he realized they cut it down. On his own money, he got a little editing place with his own money, and he was only a video store working there. He edited it back into what I'd made. And so when John Travolta, I was asked to dinner with my manager, with John Travolta and his producer, and I went because John was the biggest star with Tom Cruise at the time, and I thought, you don't get these chances very often. And John hugged me when I first met him, and he said, that's for Nostradamus. I realized you're not afraid of actors. And he said, we've called George Lucas and talked about you, and George had said, because he was making that film independently with an independent financier at a quarter of the budget that it should have been in Montreal, and he said, George has said you're the only director that could do it.
Yeah.
So that's how it came about, and so I had to do it. I mean, it's pressure from John Travolta to go and do it. I think, the key to everything on movies is casting. And I've always hung on to that. I've worked with always really good casting directors who aren't just there to throw out whoever they're famous, whoever they know, who seriously look at the movie. I don't do readings. I don't have them go in rooms and start trying to do scenes, because you get nothing. If you're not in the atmosphere and everything of the movie, you don't get anything out of it. And why are you looking at them if you're not believing they're actors? Because actors can act. That's what you pay them to do. And so, and I really learned this on The Dollar Bottom, the second film I made, and this is key to everybody and every young filmmaker. This story is told through 10-year-olds. I was in Scotland, so I hired each actor to type, because I knew they'd never acted before. And I recognized, out of all the boys I was meeting, I recognized the ones that had a spirit and could do it. And I put them into the categories of who the character was. So they weren't having to act out that character, they could just be it. And the lead boy, Taylor, I'd seen a boy who he just was the character. He was exactly right. I had one of the top casting directors in Britain who'd chosen a boy who was trained in theatre who could act. And the night before we had to make the choice, because I was starting, she was on the phone with me saying, you cannot risk it, you've got to take the boy who can act. And I was saying, but this other boy is the character, I know that and everything. She said, you can't risk it. And she said, you've got to make that decision, you've got till midnight. And I went with my instinct, and we got an Academy Award for it. And so casting is, and honestly, when I did Underworld, I had Joe Mantegna, who's one of David Mamet's actors. And Joe, I'd got Dennis Leary, he was already attached when I came on board, and Dennis wouldn't commit because he didn't like the ending. When I read the script, I said to the producers, the ending doesn't work. And they said, what would you do? And I said, I'll write you out at what it was. And they said, can we send this to Dennis Leary? And I did. They put me on the phone with him, and he said, are you going to do that? And I said, yeah, of course. I'm in, he said. Is Joe in? Because he really wanted to work with Joe Mantegna. So they organised a lunch for me with Joe. So I'm sitting at lunch, we're chatting. Joe's very easy. He's like, it's just wonderful, wonderful, easy man. And then he said, Dennis is in? I said, yeah. He said, yeah, good. So we're walking back from lunch, him and I, and then he stopped me and he said, Rog, do you do rehearsals? And I'm a director, so I'm thinking, this is a trick question. I've got to give the right answer, because he might say, oh, is that the way you... Yeah, I don't work like that. Yeah. And I needed him. So I said, Joe, look, I said, there has to be a trust between director and actor. I have to be honest. So I said, honestly, I do very little. I'm finding that we can do a read-through, we can do a bit of rehearsals, but until you're in the environment and it's all there, and I've cast correctly, he said, good, Roger, we don't have to do rehearsals, do we? And I said, no, you don't, Joe. I said, no, you're an acclaimed actor. So I said, okay, David Mamet, he's David Mamet. Anybody, students, go and watch his movies, go and read he's the foremost playwright. I'm an extraordinary talent. He's made amazing movies. So I said, okay, David Mamet, tell me, you must rehearse like hell with those and get it right. And he said, Raj, no, he works like you. We don't rehearse. And I said, you don't? And I said, well, how many takes? He must do a lot of takes. This stuff is... He said, Raj, he does 2 or 3 takes. Raj, he said, the key, he casts actors who can do the rhythms of his language, who he knows can perform what's on the page. He doesn't have to tell us what to do. And that's the secret of casting. When I was doing Nostradamus, the very top casting director in Britain, she was just wonderful. She cast all of David Lean's films. I mean, she's the number one. She was casting with me. And I already had Checky Cario, the French actor who I knew from the French films, and I wanted him in it. And that's partly why we withdrew from the big $20 million budget, because I knew I would have then had to have gone and had a Hollywood star playing it, and I wanted Checky in that lead. I knew he would be Nostradamus. So and the financier, through my friend who was part financing it, was a British, I'm not going to say his name, but he was a British financier. He was rock and roll. They did a lot of stuff like that. He financed Lawnmower Man, I think it was called, the science fiction crazy film.
Yeah.
Made a lot of money out of it.
Yeah.
So he had me and Joyce, the casting director, to the office. Bigger desk, he's behind it and everything. He said, right, he said, so the lead, this Checky Carrier, no one knows him. He said, I said, what are you trying to tell me? And he said, we're going to put in Michael Crawford in the lead. Mm-hmm. And if you look up Michael Crawford, he was famous in television for being a soppy kind of weird, funny lead. He had a famous catchphrase, something I can't remember, whatever. So I'm looking at him, think, where are we going to go? Joyce Hurley, very, very proper dame. I mean, she's very well dressed, everything, right? She said, are you serious, Ed? He said, yes. She literally pulled the desk and tipped it up on him and said, F you, Ed Simons, I'm out of this. And I followed her out. Oi, come back. He was going, come back here. What, were you really serious then? And I said, yes, we're serious, Ed. I'm making a serious movie, not a joke. And so he then said, all right, I'll let you have Checky, but I want Rutger Hauer in the film. And Rutger had done The Hitcher. He was big and famous. And I said, listen, I have no problem with Rutger Hauer. And I said, I'll offer him Henry, which was the bigger part. He said, that's fine. As long as you put him in the movie, you're okay. Everyone else is okay, right? I sent the script and a note to Rutger, and they came back and said, would you mind if he called you? And I said, no, of course not. So he said, listen, Roger, I want to play this monk. And I said, but that's a very small part, Rutger. And he said, no, you'll understand. I've done a film with Olmi in Italy, and I've had a revolution and a revelation inside me and everything. He said, and I look like the mystic monk, and I just feel him. I want to play that part. So I said, I'm fine with it. And it just worked out. He turned up in Romania. We were already shooting. I'm in this terrible town. There's no food, nothing. And he turned up looking like a mystic monk with hair down here and a beard and everything. He had a little portable typewriter he brought. And we had dinner and we talked. And then he said, listen, would you mind if I rewrote the part? Because I feel this monk. See, most directors would have said, absolutely not. You know, this is the script. You've got to do it. And I've got producers and everybody. And I knew with this, the producer was my friend, who was a famous theatre producer and everything. And he would never worry. So I let Rutger do it. And honestly, he came down in the morning with this wine-stained, coffee-stained piece of badly spelt paper. Was magic. I can't tell you, because this monk had been beaten up. He was brain damaged. Rutger understood that, because when you have a conversation with Rutger, it doesn't come out linear. You have to learn how to deal with his way he thinks. And he always said it was his finest performance, he thought, when he played this. So I think casting is everything. You know,
and there's a film about your life. Who would you cast in that to play yourself?
Me? Oh, God. Wow, that's a difficult one. There's some amazing actors out there, you know, who have it's a kind of screen presence that's very different. Be interesting. Cillian Murphy would be good.
Yeah, that's a good choice. Yeah,
he would be good. like that. You know, my favorite actor, you know, they're all my favorite, and I love them all, and I'm friends with all of them. But I did love working with Sam Elliott. He was such a kind man, and honestly, if the apocalypse comes, and I'm having to be stuck, and I got to walk across America because everything's gone, I choose Sam Elliott by my side to walk with me.
Nice. Nice. Well, you've got the Academy Awards, obviously, but you won a Lifetime Achievement as well, is that correct? In 2020?
I did, from someone, yeah, it was it was at the time of the Oscars, and a producer who wanted me to make a boxing movie that was really interesting. He sent me to China because it was to do with a Shaolin Temple fighter and a boxer who was stuck and couldn't transcend where his stuck was, and his best friend was a Shaolin Temple. He sent me out to. I stayed 7 or 8 days in the Shaolin Temple. These are experiences of a lifetime. You know, these are everything I ever think about, and spiritually and everything. They're there. And that's the Force, that's the Jedis. It all comes from the same thing. And that producer, he did a function every year with a lot of people, and he gave awards and everything. So I got an award, and Cassius Clay, his wife, second wife he'd met, who gave him all of the sayings and met him when he was down, and brought him back up. She got one as well with me. The two of us, we were at the same table. It was very interesting, me talking about, she came up with that dance like a butterfly, sting like a bee. She was coming up with these things that he did. So he gave me this Lifetime Achievement Award.
Where do you keep them? Where do you keep all your awards and stuff?
I'm still very British, you know, you have to hide it. You can't, everyone, when you look at old footage, all the actors who won them, they'd always ask in the press, where's your Oscar? And they say, I keep the toilet door open. That's all you were allowed. Because if you ever, they would, tall poppy syndrome, you know, they cut you down. So
yeah, it's not like a bragging thing.
No, not at all. They're just, you know, I just live by working and doing what I have to do, and you don't think about the prizes. And I watch the Oscars now, and it's gone. They used to be given for great work in each department. It was honoured and cherished, and who did. And nowadays, nothing to do with the work. It's like, you know that a science fiction film has still never won an Academy Award?
Yeah.
There's still a prejudice against it. You can't count Lord of the Rings is a fantasy. But other than that, it's never been allowed. And, you know, I always asked George after Phantom Menace, when he was accused of being a racist and all sorts of stuff, and he said, Roger, I never read reviews because it's nothing to do with what I do, and if you read a good one, your ego gets fluffed, and if it's a bad one, you feel terrible. So he said, all that matters is just getting on with the work. And I think that's the way that I approach it, the same way as he does.
Well,
it's an interesting. One last thing.
Yeah.
When I did The Sender, you know, it was put down by the studios. I had a horrible time. Horrible. I thought it was the end of my career and everything. And it was chosen by Claude Chabrol to open the Avoriaz Film Festival. I only found out this by accident. I went. It was the opening film, and because of that, I became friends with Mad Max George Miller, and a lot of there's kind of a, you know, in all the bad stuff that's going on, and people who you recognize, like George Miller. I mean, he loved Black Angel, and I met him later in Australia. I had lunch with him, and he gave me a copy of of Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, and he said, "You've never read this?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you read that, you'll understand what you did with Black Angel, because he took Mad Max is exactly taken from Joseph Campbell, the three parts of the hero's journey." And and I learnt then, and it's like Quentin Tarantino, I met Guillermo del Toro through The Sender. I got a message from him, "I love your film." And again, we became friends. So I think, you can't look for that success and happiness to make you happy, but when you're getting peers who are truly, truly kind of amazing talents, then that's what matters.
I just wanted to circle back to where we got started, to finish as well with lightsabers. You've created your Star Wars Fury saber.
Yes.
Like, how did that the story of that, and like he approached you, didn't he? And
no, it's another interesting story. So my 12-year-old, who was 10 then, came to me one day and said, "Dad, listen, you've got to watch Theory Sabers, because he's the Star Wars fan, and they love him." And he was telling me about him, and he said, "You should look at him." The first video of his I ever watched, he was in a car in absolute agony. His eye something had happened. He was coming from the doctor. He was in pain, holding himself like this. I'd had a macular hole in one of my eyes and had it operated and repaired. And I use alternative medicine a lot. I use Chinese, Ayurvedic. So I contacted him with a whole list of, I said, "You've got to get lutein now and take it. Get a good one, the pure, not get an organic one." I told him what to do. It was nothing to do with sabers or Star Wars, nothing. And he said, "Thank you," and everything. And we became friends. And then he said, "Listen, I can't get George on the show. Would you come on?" So I said, "Of course." I did an hour and a half with him, and it got huge reception and everything. And then he called me and said, "Listen, I decided to make the best sabers. I was fed up with not the quality and the others and all of this. I wanted the sound right. And his are amazing. And I'd got them by then. I got 4 here for Arjun, my son. And so I said, "Well," and he said, we have, I'm family with Lucasfilm, with George. I can do what I want. They know I'm a gatekeeper. I never denigrate it. But Disney is a different matter. So I'm very careful about, they know me and they accept everything I do, but I can't do commercial stuff. So I'm very well aware of that, and so is Nia. He's very careful with what he does. He said, "But we could do an origin based on your first lightsaber." And I said, "Okay." So we got it made, and I was always doubting it and said, "I don't know what's going to happen with this." And then he said, "I'm going to make 200. And I said, "Are you sure? They're never going to sell." And, all this stuff, because they weren't expensive when I look at other sabers, but it's still expensive. They sold in 3 hours, the whole 200. Yeah. So I realized, and we did it numbered, and it was a limited edition, so we can't do more because it would be unfair to the people who bought them as collectors. And so he then said to me, "Is there something else you want to do?" And I said, "Well, listen, I only did the first film. I've always in despair about," and he's a dear friend of mine who was a set decorating Empire, Return of the Jedi. He got Oscars for doing beautiful period films. He should never have been doing science fiction. So I'm always still upset over what he did to my original lightsaber by putting rivets in the handle through the T-strip, because that makes it human. It's a mystical weapon. And even having the bubble strip, by then he had a budget. He could have reproduced the bubble strip, but he put some cheap computer board in it. It's really upset me, because that went right through Star Wars. That became Luke's. So I said, what really annoyed me, and I said, I'm responsible, but I had no money to do the Darth Vader's lightsaber. But I chose the MPP flash handle, so I didn't have to make one, and it had the look about it, and that went through. And then I said, when I was on Return of the Jedi, I noticed that it was different. They told me that all of the lightsabers that we had made for the first one got stolen at the end of Empire. So this set decorator had to come up with a new one. Well, then if I was set decorating, then I would have the money and the time. I would have made, the moment I saw him on film walking into that corridor, that iconic look, I thought, wow, he deserves a better lightsaber. So I said to Nia, I would love to do my own version. I would call it the Father. He said, do it. So I designed that. That's out now, and we've sold a lot of them. It's very expensive, but it's so beautiful, this thing. It's heavy, and I always wanted red light in the handle and everything. So I've just finished today the design, because he said, you've got to do a Return of the Jedi one. And I said, well, that's difficult, because when he lost his lightsaber, had his hand cut off, this same set decorator just gave him Obi-Wan Kenobi's. I said, I would never have done that. You don't do these things. You have to approach each weapon that the character would have,
Yeah.
So I said, I have an idea. I can't change that, but I think when that climax that all of the saga comes, and he puts his lightsaber down, and Darth Vader, and they reconcile, that moment where they reconcile as father and son, and that's what Star Wars is all about. I said, to me, he would have burnt that lightsaber, and when he burns Darth Vader on screen, I think he would have got rid of the past to heal. So I think he then would have to have, he was then a Jedi Master, he would have to have a lightsaber. So I've made the one that I think he would have made on Endor.
Yeah.
So that'll be our next one.
Cool. Amazing. Well, thanks for your time, Roger. And
Not at all.
You've got a podcast of your own as well, a YouTube channel you're starting.
Yeah.
So looking forward to hearing more stories. And
I have a proper team with me. We have a Patreon site, which is growing, and YouTube, and then I can go into all the philosophies of Star Wars and Alien and everything. There's a lot I've learned over the years, which I would like to implant to students and other people, because people want to hear my stories. So we're doing that now. So that's all happening, and I think doing the lightsabers means I can do it, and get this into, because Star Wars isn't going away, it's growing bigger and bigger, and we'll see what's going to happen now, but it's interesting times.
Definitely interesting.
Yeah.
Look forward to what Disney can do, because I'm definitely more of a fan of the previous stuff before.
Yeah, everybody is. I mean, even the people who grow up in the era as they're young and they're growing up with the prequels, my son is included, and he's been to see them all, but when they see the originals, there's a certain spaghetti western kind of honesty about them. They're organic, and I think that'll come back now with a vengeance. So we'll see. Yeah. We're all waiting to see. We're all trying not to judge, but what's going to come,
What's your thoughts on Dave Filoni?
Yeah, I mean, Dave, God bless him, and because The Mandalorian is really good. He brought it back. He brought the fans back with The Mandalorian. In Obi-Wan Kenobi, if you look at the end of the series, there's a moment there that I was really worried and tense watching, because he had to dig up the lightsaber, Obi-Wan Kenobi, because it was coming into the story.
Yeah.
And I thought, what's he going to dig up? Is he going to dig up the Empire Strikes Back one? And he didn't. Dave dug up my original. There's no rivets in it, and the bubble strip. So I owe Dave a lot for his kind of passion for what George did, and to bring back all of that. And I think he brought it back in The Mandalorian. So now we'll see where it goes. I mean, times have changed. We're not all stuck doing the same thing. And George never did that. Look at the 3 films. First one's in a desert, the next one's in an ice planet, and the next one's in a forest. He's always done that, George.
Yeah.
The last 3 just stuck in a same universe and didn't really. They were great movies that JJ did. Those 2 are fantastic filmmaking, I think, but there's nothing innovative. He had to bring the fans back. So, I like George's innovation, that he would bring such a new elements to each one, and I think that's important.
Yeah, like just on the new ones as well. Gareth Edwards did Rogue One. I think you're a fan of that one as well. I just bring him up because he's from Warwickshire, so that's where I'm from, sort of thing.
Oh,
so
right.
It's kind of cool to see him.
Oh, we're friends. We're friends.
You're friends of Gareth Edwards.
I've finished a documentary which gone way beyond the book, and everything is in there, and I'm telling the stories, and you meet people behind the carpenter who made R2-D2, the manager who found me the Graflexes. I mean, all these people, all of these are history, right? So I really wanted. Guillermo offered, so he's interviewed throughout because he's very erudite about it, but the one person I really wanted was Gareth. And he's given me a lot of material, and it's 2 hours, 20 minutes fan special, or it'll be broken up, but he's the kind of key to each chapter. And I always say to this day, I want to see his original, because I would love to see what he did before she changed it. And when Blade Runner came out, I was so angry at the reception and everything, because I realized this film was a masterpiece. And I had the same agent as Ridley, and he'd fled to Mexico. He didn't know what he'd done wrong. And I wrote him I scrawled like this: "Fuck them all, Ridley. You've made a masterpiece." And they sent it down. He was flying down to see him the next day. I did the same with Gareth when I saw what he'd done. And the really accurate kind of vision of AI and the future and robots and everything are in his movie that he did, and it made enough money to cover its cost, but it was never applauded or acclaimed. And you know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's a masterpiece of cinema making, and he made it with cameras that you can go and buy in Best Buy. He didn't have huge expensive equipment and crews. He had 8 of those they bought. You can buy them for $500 each. The whole film is made on that. He made a $400 million movie for $80 million. He did the same thing. And I think that, so I'm a huge fan of his. And so I'm glad to see now with Jurassic, it was a huge hit for him. So and he won't change. He'll still keep making the same way he's making movies. That's who he is. So, a lot of the Northerners, like Ridley's from Newcastle, and Tony is from Newcastle, and Frank Rodham. I mean, there's a lot of directors come out.
Is there any director that you want to come into Star Wars, or do you think that's down to find someone new?
It's difficult. I would give Gareth one to make.
Yeah.
With he was doing the little small television kind of movie compared to all the other big ones, but every fan I know says that was their favorite, Rogue One. Yeah. So I would give him one for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coming out or opening this year, the Lucas Museum. Do you
Yeah,
have much insight into that? And is there going to be things from that you created in that museum?
a few, but George sold to build that museum, and he really wants the young and the old of America to go back and look at art and how important art is. So it's only a small part of the museum, Star Wars. He's got a massive collection of modern artists, of posters, cinema posters. He's got thousands of them, originals. It's all about art and looking at art and seeing art, because he thinks that's very important for America, especially at this stage now. So there's a few things in there. He had to. He wouldn't have done it, but he has to.
It's going to be massive, though, isn't it? It's going to be huge.
Stunning. It's going to be stunning. I mean, what I've seen so far and heard about, it's going to be stunning. Again, it's like everything, and George, the ranch, when you go to the ranch, he designed every window, every door, every hinge. He designed everything. And like most people have big fancy the mixing studios, and this is the number one in America. It's a mixed studio. You go up an old gravel path under vines growing over you through vine fields and stuff. It's like being in New England countryside.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's beautiful. He put in a lake, which is natural. They have organic farms, everything. It's just, he has an infinity for the kind of the natural world.
Yeah, I've just seen clips on YouTube, really, but yeah, it looks amazing.
Yeah, it'll be amazing. It'll be stunning, and it's what I think it's that's the only thing I miss being here is the museums and art galleries of London. I mean, there's nowhere else like it, and Europe has great galleries too. France and Spain. Yeah. That's missing in America. It's missing here. We don't have it. There's nothing. That tradition, so he's tried to instill that into America and the way of doing it. Like it looks like an amazing spaceship, but I think everything will be designed for how you look at things. George has taken great care in that, because it matters. Maybe a lot of the modern world wouldn't be so happy in a stuffy old British museum, the art galleries and stuff. But he's done it for like he did with Star Wars. He's done it in a way that should bring in a modern audience.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time again, Roger. And
not at all.
Is there any just closing bit of advice for my target audience? I think would be people starting out getting into filmmaking. So, what's like the most? Obviously, you've already covered a bit, but what's like the quote that you'd probably like to say to some people?
I think what Ridley says as well, that as he said, it's tough, and it's tough and hard, and you've got to be resilient to that, and you've got to fight your way through it, and you'll make it if you approach it that way and be dedicated to your storytelling, to your craft. Alan Pakula, who is one of the great American directors of all time. When I was at the Avoriaz Festival, George Miller, they all came down to me and gave me hugs and said, "What you've done with the Sender is amazing." And Paramount execs were all there looking in shock. They were hating the movie. And Alan Pakula asked me to lunch, and he just looked at me and said, "Was it hard to make this movie?" And I said, "Does it show?" And he said, "Look, I'm directing Sophie's Choice." He said, "The money's fallen out. I haven't told my actors. I'm on the stairs every night trying to get the money back in." And he said, just you have to be very thick-skinned. And I always tell students, if you're trying to get over this wall, it's a brick wall, and you've actually worn your fingers down to the bone, and you're still trying, and people are kicking you in the ribs with jackboots on. And you're going to go, "I'm going to get over that wall." And I said, "You'll make it. And once you get there, if you've got talent, that's a bonus." So it's as I said, it's find your voice, find your instinct. Meditation's the best thing for that. Just go inside, see what comes at you, because it'll be there. Avatar is based on a dream. He had a dream about that, and the whole thing is based on his dreams. So I think, just do it. You have to just go and do it and get it done and start making things. It doesn't matter how.
And the rainbows will come out as well if you just put yourself.
Yep. That's what happens,
Cheers,
you have to be open to it. Yeah, it's all there, The points of destiny are all there for us, just like Luke. The problem is most people don't recognize when those strikes of destiny happen. And if you recognize it, you take it. And most times it'll be when everyone's telling you, don't do that.
Yeah.
And you do it.
Nice. Well, thank you, Roger, man. That was amazing.
Okay.
Cheers.
Okay, bye.
Bye.